Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 11.
Picture yourself on a balcony and you're watching your life in front of you. So kind of take the personalization out of it and just see, what do you notice? And are you in alignment with your values? Why is it that the feeling is showing up? Two questions that I really love is, what's the threat? What are you scared of? And what's missing? What aren't you seeing that maybe is important for you to recognize? Sometimes we filter things out, for whatever reason. And so sometimes just ask yourself, what's missing? What am I leaving out? What am I not saying? What am I not seeing? That's a helpful question too.
Well, our guest today is an expert in emotional health and the MindBody Connection. Patti Davis is a licensed mental health counselor. Patti uses adventure therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical, family systems, gestalt, and play therapy with people of all ages to help them overcome issues such as grief, self-esteem, stress, anxiety, depression, and more. Welcome, Patti, to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, first, I'd like to get to know a little bit more about you. But before we can get started, what is a licensed mental health counselor?
So that's someone who has gone through graduate school and then is licensed by the state. So I had to do 3,000 hours of therapy and I was supervised. And then once I passed a national exam and got all my hours, then you become what's called a licensed mental health counselor.
Wow, 3,000 hours.
I know. It's a lot of work. It really is.
Well, you just have a smile from ear to ear, so you must be living your life path right now.
I feel like I am where I need to be. Yeah, I do.
Fantastic. And so bring us back to the moment when you first realized you wanted to become a counselor.
When I was in undergraduate school, I considered being a counselor, but there was some intuitive sense that it would overwhelm me, that I wouldn't be able to have enough strength to walk with people without being overwhelmed. And so I didn't go that way. I went the business route, did that for 10 years, and then had my son, stayed home full time. And then when my son was about 10, I realized that I was ready to do something more and different, and I wanted to do something with people. I was doing a lot of informal counseling all the time with my friends, and decided I wanted to be trained. And so that's when I went back to school. I actually only applied to one school because that was the one that I'd heard was the best, and it would be the only school that would work with my life as it was then. And I decided I'm going to let the universe kind of decide. And if it's meant to be, if that's my path, I'll get in. And if it's not, then I'll know that door's closed and I'll figure something else out.
Yeah, why settle?
Right. And so it opened up and yeah. And the timing was right. I'm glad that I didn't do it when I was 20. I needed to be older.
And you had all that wisdom behind you.
I absolutely did. For me, that was critical.
Fantastic. I'm sure you bring that to the table when you're working with your, now, is it patients or clients?
I call them clients. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Because I have gone through so much, so I can relate to a lot of people on a lot of different levels. And so it's easy for me to kind of put myself in their shoes. And then also step out and say, okay, this is what I know. This is what I see. This might be helpful.
Absolutely. I'd pay someone just to step in my shoes and hear me.
Yes.
Just that alone, I think would be therapeutic.
Well, it is. It's called validation. And if I can compassionately witness what you are going through, that in and of itself is healing.
Wow. So I think there's a stigma that women or even, men think they have to be sick in order to seek counseling, or it's like, no, I'm healthy, I don't need that. And I'm sure Hollywood hasn't done that industry any justice. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you just imagine someone lying on the couch in that very Freudian style, or someone just hopped up on a bunch of antipsychotic meds. And so we don't think, or at least mainstream media doesn't have us think that counseling is something that healthy people do to be healthier.
Yes. Yeah, like everyone goes to the dentist and that seems fine. Everyone can go to the optometrist and that's fine. But to see a counselor, I think it's changing. I think like my son's generation, I think they're much more open and much more willing. And they suggest counseling to each other. But certainly my parents' generation, it was not very welcomed. And there was a lot of shame around it. And even my generation, like if I'm at a party and people ask what I do and I say I'm a therapist or I'm a counselor, and you can see like they don't necessarily then want to talk anymore because they're worried.
You're judging
like
them.
Yeah, exactly. Or, So I think it's getting better. I love to think of therapy as preventative sometimes. And yeah, it's one of those things that I think really healthy people do a lot, if they can. I mean, it's just like exercise.
So like mental, emotional exercise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Physical health, mental health.
Our holistic idea, the whole idea of holistic medicine is that we have a mental body, an emotional body, a spiritual body, and a physical body. Mm-hmm. And when we have a physical ailment, it's not only on that realm, that they're all interconnected, that we can have an emotional trauma and then all of a sudden sickness.
Right, stored in our body somehow. Yeah.
Have you seen that? Have you seen where you help someone with a mental or emotional block and then they recovered from a physical ailment?
Well, often that is what happens in therapy. Someone will come because they're very depressed. So, we all experience sadness. But when you get stuck in it, that is what depression is. And then if people come into the office and they can talk about whatever it is that is blocking them, then oftentimes their spirit lifts and they feel better, and then they're more motivated to engage with people. Depression, you tend to want to isolate yourself. And so when the depression then is lifted, then they're willing to go out and be more active and social. And yeah, I personally believe that we store things in our body. And so if there are traumas that we can't resolve, then, they're just with us all the time. And then we get constricted. So the more that we can do, it can be talk therapy. I personally believe there's many ways to the top of the mountain. There's many paths. So, maybe you can work out your trauma through massage, or maybe you can do it with talk therapy, or maybe you can do it with spiritual guidance. I think there's lots of ways to get there. But I do absolutely believe there's a connection, and the body will speak when the mind cannot. Or if you can't voice something, I think your body will voice it for you. That's what I think.
I absolutely agree with that. I've seen that where specifically I know a woman who had so much guilt she was holding on to, and she could not process it, could not speak of it, that she developed like intense back pain for years, was on Oxycontin and other drugs. And when she went through therapy, and she was so unconscious that she even had the guilt. It was so traumatic for her. And when she got there and she released it, she got to the root cause, her chronic back pain that was persistent for over 10 years went away in that session.
I believe it.
So I absolutely can see the mind-body connection. Also, I used to work in physical therapy clinic as a physical therapist assistant. And the clients that would come in who had the same condition, we'd have two people with frozen shoulder, both pretty much the same. The one who had a really negative attitude about their outcome would continually re-injure, and the other person had a very positive view, had no negative emotions around it, recovered and healed very quickly.
Yes.
And I saw this over and over again, where those who had emotional maybe stuckness, they couldn't move forward with their physical healing.
Right. There's, I think a lot of us have thought patterns, and some of our patterns serve us well, and some of our patterns are not helpful. And so it's really like part of my job is to help you see what your pattern is and how it's impacting your life. And is that the way you want it to go? Because you have choices. There's another thought pattern that's possible. So that is some of the work that we would do in the room together.
So you help people become conscious of their unconscious patterns?
Yes, a lot of times that's what it is, that people don't understand what the pattern is.
And once they become aware of the pattern, then what? It's like, is being aware enough, or are there ways that or tools that you have to help someone now create a new pattern that's healthy for them?
Absolutely. So awareness is huge first step. Understanding and accepting that this is the rut I am in. And then the next step, though, oftentimes people, because they've been in the rut for so long, they don't know another alternative. And so then my job is to help with skills, like to literally say, okay, when this happens, you need to turn your mind to this other thought. Or so, yeah, then my job is to help you change. Right. So first it's to understand what's happening, and then it's to help you find different ways of coping or other ways of thinking that are more effective.
Now let's talk about these different therapies you do, because I'm very curious. So adventure therapy sounds like I'm going to go out, and kayaking, and
Yes.
I want to sign up for some weekend adventure therapy. So what is adventure therapy?
Adventure therapy is using, adventure as a way to kind of bump up against some of the things that you're struggling with. So I use it a lot with younger kids because it's easier to just have them do some reparative work using something fun. And it could be as simple as going outside and using a hula hoop, or being in nature. Or there's rope courses now these days that are very popular. That's adventure therapy. But it's the idea that you come into contact with what scares you and then you kind of push through it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I had that experience with giving birth, because it's now my mind is like, I gave birth, I can do anything.
That's exactly right. A lot of women feel that way. Yes.
That was it. That was my adventure therapy.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That's great. One of the things you also do is play therapy. What's the difference between play therapy and adventure therapy?
In my mind, they're very similar. Play therapy, again, I do use with younger kids mostly, and I use it as a way to kind of distract them so that they're not so focused on something, and then we'll just start asking questions so that they can be very relaxed and that the information can come up without them being so guarded. So, sometimes we'll use puppets, we can use doll houses, we can use coloring or games. But the thing about kids is they're not as verbal, which is great. But so then there's other ways that you want them to communicate and express. Yeah, we can do things like role play, so it's just another way to do the work.
Got it. Well, I bet that a lot of our listeners are parents. Mm. When would you recommend a parent find a counselor for their child?
That's a great question. I guess if there are things like they're not wanting to go to school and there's like a persistent, like really strenuous fight around going to school, and it lasts, 3 or 4 weeks. If you're seeing eating issues or issues around maybe your child is not able to keep friends, that there's something happening, so they're feeling really lonely and alienated. Things that seem out of the bell curve. Human beings, we're so unique. And so there's a lot of development that happens at different times for kids. So I don't want parents to jump in too quickly. But yet if you see after like a month or 2 months, sometimes your school will give you feedback. The school might say, you might want to think about, we see your child really struggling on the playground, or, there's a lot of tears and we don't know what's happening. Some parents also, if there's a big life event, for example, if there's cancer in a mom or a dad, or there's a divorce, or if something very traumatic happens to a family member, then those are times that a therapist can step in and really help support the child, and sometimes even the family, so that the healing can be quicker, and that, sometimes we can help do things so that the pain, while you can't take it away, it's more manageable. Mm-hmm. The quality of the pain is easier to bear, mm-hmm. right?
For parents who, once the parent has decided to take their child to a counselor, mm-hmm. what advice would you give a parent whose child is in counseling?
A lot of times now, depending on the child. So let's say this is someone who's less than 13, okay? Because in the state of Washington, at least if you're 13 or older, then the child is the client, meaning that the confidentiality now is between the therapist and the 13-year-old. So let's start with the group that's younger than that first. I think the most important thing is to really bring the counselor in to understand that a really good counselor is an ally and a foxhole buddy, and that the more that they can know, the better, so that they can be supportive. Sometimes it's just things that the therapist can suggest to the parents that might make a big difference. Yeah, especially when a child is 7, 8, or 9, the parents have a big sphere of influence. So the more that they can work closely with the counselor, the better.
Yeah, I think that some parents are afraid they're going to be judged. Like they're afraid that the counselor is going to take something out of context, or and judge them, just like when you're at a cocktail party and you're
absolutely
and someone hears your counselor and all of a sudden they don't want to talk to you anymore.
Right.
It's like the parent is afraid that they're going to be judged, like, oh, they're a bad parent for their kid needing counseling.
So you're absolutely right. I think as human beings, we often want to avoid being judged. And so when we feel or we worry that we're going to be judged, we really kind of shrink and we don't share. So I think one of the most important things about finding a really good counselor is that they are not judgmental, that they really allow you to be accurate. And that you don't magnify things, you don't minimize things. You're actually just very accurate in what you're talking about. Because that's the way to see things clearly and to help. And so what I hope to do is to model for the client or for the parents like a non-judgmental stance. And then just look at, is what's happening effective or not effective?
Mm-hmm. Results-based.
Are you okay with the outcome? And if the outcome isn't what you want, let's do something different. So there's no judgment around it. It's just like, is this working or not? Is this effective or not? And then you get to decide as a parent, right?
How would someone go about finding a good counselor, or sort of what would your checklist be for someone to look for?
I personally talk with my friends. So, so I have done my own work. And so when I was looking for a therapist, I just talked to my friends and found a girlfriend that I really trusted, and she said that this therapist really worked for her. I think the biggest thing about a counselor is that it's a good fit. And so you want to, most counselors will give you like a 20-minute, either a meet and greet, or you can just do one session and just really feel them out. Do you feel comfortable in the space? Do you feel comfortable with them? It's not a right and wrong. It's just, it clicks or it doesn't. It's almost like dating in a way,
Mm-hmm.
you just know. And so I would really encourage people to be thoughtful, be very thoughtful, because this person is going to be influential and hopefully like a port in the storm. And so you want to make sure it's someone that you feel very comfortable with.
One of the doctors we've interviewed, Dr. Megan Saunders, says that when you're choosing a doctor, so I think it is the same with a counselor, it needs to be speed dating. You're in control, and you go and you meet the person, and if you're not comfortable with that doctor, then you don't have to be with, unless this is the only doctor in town.
Right.
You need to be an advocate for yourself and know that you can keep going, and it's like speed dating. You will find the right counselor, the right doctor.
That's absolutely right. And I would say that you can kind of truncate that process by talking with people that you trust and seeing if they've done their own work and who would they recommend. So, maybe get 3 or 4 names and then either talk to them on the phone or go visit them. And some therapists who are good might be, full, but then you can say, well, who do you recommend? And so people who are very good usually recommend really good therapists as well. And so, yeah, I think that's probably, the relationship is the most important thing, because if the client is open to my influence and is willing to reveal things that are scary or feel shameful, that is the most important thing. Everything else comes after that. But if the relationship's not there, I don't think the therapy will be effective.
we sort of gotten on this roll about talking about parents and children, so I'm just going to keep
Sure,
going with
sure,
that one.
Sure.
So when I was a kid, ADHD was just, it was not known. I mean, it really wasn't around. And now it seems that every kid's being put on Ritalin,
Yeah,
which is really sad.
I agree.
To put something that affects our, neurons, while the little child's, neurons are still growing.
I agree. The neural pathways are just being formed. And so, yeah, I have concerns about that as well. So one of the things I think that is very helpful is to teach the skill of mindfulness. And mindfulness is learning how to, be able to pay attention, because ADD is about not being able to manage your focus, right, and your attention. So mindfulness is the skill of being able to pay attention to something on purpose in this moment without judgment and without attachment. And so I find that if I work with kids around the skill of being mindful, that it does help them with their ADD. Sometimes kids, when there is a trauma or they're scared or there's a lot of sadness, they just can't attend because they don't want to, meaning like it just seems too painful. Things are going on at home that are too difficult. And so sometimes they just can't attend. And so sometimes teaching them how to be mindful is a really nice remedy. It can really help soothe them. And then I like to go that route before pills. So I'll always kind of say skills and not pills. Sometimes you do
pills.
Right. Now sometimes you do need both. Like I work with adults who have been chronically anxious or chronically depressed. So sometimes you need to help the brain chemistry so that they can get their oar in the water and get some traction. That happens sometimes. If you've been so depressed for so long, sometimes you do need to balance out the chemicals in the brain. But then once you've got that and you get the skills underneath you, like how to regulate your emotions, how to be interpersonally effective, how to bear pain skillfully. I love that skill. So once you get the skills underneath you, then and you feel like you've mastered it, then maybe you can check in and see maybe you can taper off the meds because maybe you don't need them anymore. Meds can be like a cast, right? You have a broken arm, you cast it. But you don't leave the cast on forever. And so for some people, I take that approach.
How to bear pain skillfully.
I know, don't you love that?
I think everyone's ears perked up. I mean, now I want to go to a counselor just for preventive. I want to learn these skills so when something happens, I've got them already. I don't want to wait till pain happens and then have to go learn how to deal with it.
Yeah. So I'll be honest. Some of the things that I'm talking about now are DBT skills. So I'm an intensively trained dialectical behavioral therapist. And so DBT was created by Marsha Linehan, who's here at the University of Washington. It is now worldwide. But the thing I think that Marsha has done is really been able to help people understand that you can regulate your emotions and that you can bear pain skillfully. And she's come up with teachable ways of helping people do that. And so, the idea of we all have pain. That is just life. I mean, I think you have to radically accept that we will all come in contact with things that are difficult. And yet, how can I bear the pain without making it worse? How do I do that? And so when I'm working with clients, that's a lot of what we're talking about. What do you have to radically accept? What can you problem solve? And some of the clients just haven't been taught some of these skills.
Right, because our parents didn't know. They were doing their best, but our parents didn't know how to teach us to process emotions, or maybe they did, but not 100%. Or it's sort of like our parents say, you should save money, but they didn't teach us how.
Exactly. So, I think a lot of times our parents, and I'm a parent too, so as a parent, I know I do the best I can, and sometimes I need to do better, right? And that's same with the clients too. The clients come in, they're doing the absolute best they can, and they want additional skills so that their life can be of higher quality, so they can just feel better. And so I really do love the DBT approach, and I really do love the skills that that it teaches.
So you can go to a counselor to help learn life skills.
Absolutely.
So it's not just for emotional trauma or, mental blocks.
That's usually what brings people in the door.
Right. That's the same with naturopathic medicine. People usually go to a naturopath because they're sick, not because it's like, hey, I really want to make sure I prevent cancer down the road.
Right. Because we're all so busy. And so there's always a hierarchy of, what has to get done. And so usually our suffering has to be at a high level for us to attend and go to a therapist. But yeah, so the idea is that once you learn the skills, there's a dialectic, which means there's a whole continuum. And so you start as a beginner. And when you first start to learn these life skills, you feel uncomfortable. It's like learning how to speak another language. And so it takes a lot of thought and energy, and it feels uncomfortable. But if you keep persevering and you keep practicing and with repetition over and over, you then become a master at it. And that's when it's fun. And that's when things get easier. And that's when you kind of have the bigger picture. And you kind of have the wisdom of, okay, I know I can't change this, so I'm just going to accept it. Or, yeah, this I can problem solve. This I'm going to go after. And I use them all the time. I'll be honest. I learned DBT in probably around 2009. And then I started using the skills because in my own life, someone that I love dearly has cancer. And so I then had to find ways to keep myself balanced and keep myself in ways of thinking that are helpful and didn't make things worse. And so I just use them all the time. And that's why I love to teach it, because I know they work. They worked for me. They continue to work for me. And so that's why I like to work with clients around it.
It sounds like you could also teach parents skills so that they could maximize their parenting.
So that's what I work at a clinic right now where we all do DBT therapy. And oftentimes I work with a lot of teens who are struggling, and the parents struggle too, because they love each other dearly, and yet they can't find their way. It's kind of like they keep missing. So we will do groups where one room, the teens are all together and are learning this skill. Let's say the skill might be radical acceptance. The same time down the hall, just the parents are learning the same skill. So that in the family, they both understand the skill, and that we find that really does help the clients heal faster, because then the family also understands the skills and they also incorporate their own skillfulness. What I see often is when a teen gets dysregulated, when a teen is really struggling with suicidal thoughts or self-harm or some really deep things, the parents get dysregulated too. And then the whole system, there's like these mini earthquakes going on all the time, and they can't make good choices. Mm-hmm. And so it's about how can we help the teen learn how to balance their emotions? How can we help the parents learn so that they can make a more wise-minded decision? Because often when we're in emotion mind, that's what DBT calls it. You tend to be more impulsive, and your choices make things worse.
I love that. I mean, could you imagine if we all? It's like you take prenatal classes.
Yeah,
right.
I know.
Why isn't it that when we take parenting classes to teach us skills so that we can be more mindful parents?
I would love. Now, I know that there are some people that are trying now to get this in the schools, because I don't think kids should have to be in therapy to get these skills. This should be like you learn how to write checks, you learn how to add, you learn how to say yes and say no respectfully and skillfully, right?
Oh my gosh. If we could teach all children how to enforce boundaries in a healthy manner.
Right. Exactly.
Could you imagine?
So that's like interpersonal effectiveness, right? How can I get what I need? How can I skillfully ask for what I need? How can I say no respectfully so that I don't wound the relationship? That's like life skills. And so I wish that DBT was taught in the schools. They are pushing that. I know that they're doing some trials. I think it's in New York. But yeah, I would love for everyone to have this.
I think a parent's one of our biggest fears is that our child will be influenced by other kids in a negative way because they're going to give into, peer pressure.
Sure.
And I mean, I remember in high school, I'm a very strong and independent person, but it was so easy to get sucked into wanting to be accepted by others. And I would do things that were out of my character to be accepted. And I just know that that's so easy to get sucked into as a kid. And if we're able to teach kids and parents how to enforce boundaries healthfully, how to have self-esteem.
I know.
Oh my gosh.
How preventative would it be, right? And you're right. Part of a teen's developmental task is to really lean on their friends. So part of that is trying on other ways of being, right? Like you said, even though it was out of your character, but some of our developmental task is to try on different ways of being. And then you come back to who you really are. So some of that experimenting is, I think, healthy. But what happens is if you go outside the bell curve and the experimenting then becomes really reckless, right? Or that you're risking doing some permanent harm, that's where I think these kids need help and support.
I love that. It sounds like, that's again, it doesn't sound like you're judging them. You're supporting them and exploring, who they want to become and learning what they don't want and what by doing it and then realize, hey, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that way.
That's right. That what happens is, if you think of your emotions as being, having a function in your life, and let's say you're 16 years old and you're, say, experimenting sexually, right? And then you have these very guilty feelings afterwards. Sometimes as a therapist, I would explore that because the guilt has a function. The function of the guilt is to get you to pay attention. Are you out of alignment with your own values? Are the behaviors out of alignment with who you want to be? And so we need to check in. And if you're out of alignment with your values, then the guilt will be there because it's going to say, pay attention, right? Now, sometimes guilt shows up and it's not justified, right? Like as a woman, maybe we're culturally taught to not say no, let's say. And so sometimes guilt will come up and it will be not justified guilt. And then I'll help work through that as well, right? Because if you are in alignment with your values and you still feel guilty, then it means it's not justified guilt and you need to let that go. Mm-hmm. So if you think about your emotions have a function, why, of course, is this feeling showing up for me? What is it trying to communicate? What is it trying to get me to pay attention to? And that's why feelings are important. And then once you get the lesson, once you get the message, then take the lesson and let go of the feeling, whether it's guilt or sadness or anxiety, because you got the lesson.
What are questions that someone can ask themselves to get to the lesson?
So one of the questions I would ask is, let's see, that's good. So I think about myself, maybe I would ask that you picture yourself on a balcony and you're watching your life in front of you. So kind of take the personalization out of it and just see, what do you notice? And are you in alignment with your values? Why is it that the feeling is showing up? Two questions that I really love is, what's the threat? What are you scared of? And what's missing? What aren't you seeing that maybe is important for you to recognize? Sometimes we filter things out, for whatever reason. And so sometimes just ask yourself, what's missing? What am I leaving out? What am I not saying? What am I not seeing? That's a helpful question too.
So what's missing? Mm-hmm. And what's the threat?
Mm-hmm. What's the threat? Maybe why am I scared? What's holding me back from trying a new way?
That is fantastic. Those are all writer downers. Everyone needs to pause the podcast and go get their pen and rewind it. That's great. Well, thank you so much. I have so many more questions, so we're going to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
But I'd love for you to leave our listeners with some parting wisdom. Since we sort of ended up on this topic of parents and children, What is like a tool or something that all parents and children can do together to increase understanding with each other?
So I think the most important thing that parents can do is really first listen and understand completely their child's point of view. I think often as a parent, we find ourselves like adversaries. And what I know about kids is that they're not open to your influence. They will not listen to you if they feel you are adversarial and that you don't understand completely what's happening. So as a parent, and what I encourage my parents to do is completely understand. It doesn't mean that you agree with it, but that you completely understand. Oh, I understand now why you really don't want to go to school. It's because of the big fight you just had with your best friend and you don't know where to sit at lunch. And so you really have to completely understand in a non-judgmental way what your teen is concerned about. And then take a deep breath. And then from there, think about now what? But if you don't understand the problem completely and from their point of view, I don't think you're going to have much influence and you won't have much success.
I'm going to use that. And I hope our parents do too, because I brought myself back to my childhood. And you're exactly right. I mean, if my parents didn't know where I was, I just wanted to keep fighting for my voice to be heard.
Of course. And once someone understands you fully, I've seen it with kids. When you articulate completely what they're experiencing, they soften. Once they know you get it, and you're not judging them, you just really get it, then you can do some work, but not before. So you have to completely acknowledge, validate, understand, accept where they are, and then, only then, can you have some change. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the show. Hey, if anyone is in the Seattle area and wants to connect with you, what is the best way for someone to do that?
Wonderful. I would say they can email me. It's patti.davis@comcast.net, or they can call me. My line is 206-321-5003. They can also look under Psychology Today and put in my name, and I will, have my bio there, and they can read about all the things that they want to know.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Patti Davis. We will have you back on the show.
Thanks so much.
How would you like to learn from top naturopathic physicians? Go to freedoctorcourse.com and sign up for the free course that'll email you videos with tips and tricks to achieving optimal health. That's freedoctorcourse.com. freedoctorcourse.com.